I thought the happiest photograph from my son's wedding would become the one that changed everything. Instead, it was the one no one was ever supposed to notice. I'm grateful you're here. Stay with me until the very end of my story, and let me know where you're watching from. Sometimes the smallest detail can uncover the biggest family secret, and that's exactly what happened to me. My name is Gloria Brooks. I'm 71 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and a proud Black mother from Charlotte, North Carolina. For most of my life, I believed that patience could heal almost anything. I believed families stumbled, forgave, and found their way back to one another. Looking back now, I realize I was holding on to that belief long after everyone else had quietly let it go. 3 days after my son Marcus married Vanessa, my phone rang just after 9 o'clock on a calm Tuesday morning. I had just finished watering the roses in my backyard, the same roses my late husband Harold had planted nearly 30 years earlier. Their deep red petals glistened under the morning sun, and for a brief moment, life felt peaceful. Weddings have a way of making mothers dream about fresh beginnings. I had spent the last few days smiling every time I remembered Marcus standing proudly at the altar. Despite everything life had taken from our family after Harold passed away, I truly believed we were finally stepping into a brighter chapter. The caller ID displayed a name I recognized immediately. Ethan Carter, the wedding photographer. I smiled before answering, assuming he was calling about the finished album. "Good morning, Ethan," I said warmly. "Are the photographs ready already?" Silence lingered for a second longer than expected. His voice finally came through, unusually restrained. "Mrs. Brooks, I need to ask if we could meet in person." The smile slowly disappeared from my face. "I thought you were calling about the wedding album." "I am." Another pause. "But there's something I found while editing the photographs." I leaned against the kitchen counter without realizing it. My heart wasn't racing yet, but something deep inside me shifted in a way I couldn't explain. "What kind of something?" I asked. "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone." His words were careful, almost rehearsed, as though he had repeated them to himself before dialing my number. "I've photographed more than 200 weddings," he continued quietly. "I've seen nervous brides, emotional parents, unexpected moments, but I've never made a phone call like this." A cold sensation settled across my shoulders. Outside the kitchen window, the wind gently moved the branches of the old oak tree. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Birds still sang. Cars still passed along the street. Somewhere, a neighbor was mowing the lawn. The world continued exactly as it had a minute earlier, yet mine suddenly felt suspended between two breaths. I forced myself to remain calm. "Is Marcus all right?" "Yes." "Vanessa?" "She's physically fine." Physically. It was such a strange word to choose. I tightened my grip around my coffee mug. "Ethan, you're frightening me." "I'm sorry." His apologies sounded genuine. "I simply believe you deserve to see something before these photographs are delivered. Not before Marcus. Not before Vanessa. Before anyone else." Those words echoed inside my mind. I thought back to the wedding day. It had been beautiful. The church glowed with stained glass reflecting soft afternoon light. Friends laughed. Children chased each other between rows of white chairs. Marcus had looked happier than I had seen him in years. Vanessa wore an elegant gown and smiled for nearly every photograph. If there had been anything unusual, I hadn't noticed it. Or perhaps I hadn't wanted to. "I can meet this afternoon," I finally said. "Thank you." His voice carried unmistakable relief. "I'll bring my laptop." Some things only make sense when you see the entire sequence. The entire sequence. Not one photograph. A sequence. After we ended the call, I stood alone in my quiet kitchen for several minutes. My untouched coffee had already begun to cool beside me. On the refrigerator door hung a small magnet, holding Marcus's childhood drawing of our family together, faded after decades, but still impossible for me to throw away. I looked at our smiling stick figures and whispered to myself, almost as a prayer, "Please let this be a misunderstanding." Deep inside, however, another voice had already begun preparing me for a truth I wasn't ready to face. The drive to Ethan Carter's studio took less than 20 minutes, yet it felt much longer. Every red light gave my mind another opportunity to imagine possibilities I didn't want to consider. Perhaps someone had blinked during the family portrait. Perhaps there had been a technical problem with the files. Maybe he had accidentally captured an embarrassing moment that he wanted to discuss privately before delivering the final album. I clung to those ordinary explanations because they were comforting. Ordinary problems have ordinary solutions. His studio occupied the second floor of a renovated brick building downtown. The reception area smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished wood. Framed wedding portraits covered nearly every wall. Brides laughing beneath summer skies. Elderly couples dancing barefoot at golden anniversaries. Fathers wiping away quiet tears before walking their daughters down the aisle. Ethan had built a reputation for capturing honest emotion rather than stage perfection. That was one of the reasons Marcus and Vanessa had insisted on hiring him. When I stepped inside, Ethan stood immediately. His usual cheerful smile was gone. "Mrs. Brooks." He offered a gentle handshake. "Thank you for coming." "I wish I knew why I'm here," I answered, attempting a small smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it formed. He led me into a private editing room. Large monitors filled one wall, while shelves of camera equipment lined another. The room was dim except for the soft glow of computer screens. Everything felt quiet, almost respectful, like a library where difficult truths were carefully preserved. He didn't rush. He poured me a cup of tea before taking his seat across from me. "I've been debating whether to make this call since yesterday morning," he admitted. "You could have simply delivered the photographs." "I could have. But you didn't." "No." His honesty somehow unsettled me more than any dramatic speech could have. He opened a folder labeled, simply, "Brooks' Wedding." Hundreds of tiny image thumbnails appeared across the screen. "I always review every wedding several times," he explained. "The first pass is for technical quality. The second is for storytelling. The third is usually where I notice details I missed while shooting." I nodded quietly. Photographers often see moments no one else notices because we're looking through a lens instead of participating in the event. His cursor slowly moved across dozens of smiling faces. Children throwing flower petals. Guests applauding. Marcus adjusting his tie. Vanessa laughing beside her bridesmaids. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. Beautiful. Warm. Perfect. "You had a wonderful celebration," Ethan said softly. "I thought so." "So did I." He hesitated. "Until yesterday." The room suddenly felt colder. He enlarged a photograph taken before the ceremony. Vanessa stood near one of the church's stained glass windows while her bridesmaids adjusted her veil. "There," he said quietly. I leaned closer. "I don't understand." "Neither did I." He zoomed further. Vanessa wasn't looking toward her bridesmaids. She wasn't looking toward the mirror. She was looking across the hallway, at someone outside the frame. Her expression caught my attention immediately. It wasn't nervousness. It wasn't excitement. It was recognition. The kind of silent recognition people share when words aren't necessary. "Who was she looking at?" I asked. I wondered the same thing. He clicked to the next photograph. Taken less than 2 seconds later. Her eyes remained fixed in exactly the same direction. Another click. Another. Another. The angle changed slightly with each frame, revealing more of the hallway. At first, only part of a dark suit appeared. Then a hand. Then the shoulder of a man standing quietly behind several guests. He wasn't part of the wedding party. He wasn't greeting anyone. He wasn't even watching the ceremony preparations. He was watching Vanessa, and she was watching him. Neither of them smiled. Neither waved. Neither spoke. Yet something invisible seemed to pass between them. I felt my fingers tighten around the teacup. "Do you know who he is?" Ethan slowly shook his head. I checked the guest list Marcus gave me. "He isn't on it." A strange weight settled in my chest. There are moments in life when nothing has technically happened, yet everything changes. This was one of them. It could still mean nothing. I whispered, more to reassure myself than him. "It could." He agreed immediately. "That's exactly what I hoped." Then he opened another sequence. This one had been taken nearly 3 hours later during the reception. Different room, different lighting, different guests. The same man. Again, always somewhere in the background. Always close enough to be seen. Always looking toward Vanessa. And every few minutes, she looked back. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. I truly did. When you've spent more than 70 years believing in the goodness of people, your first instinct is not suspicion. Your first instinct is hope. Hope can be comforting, but it can also be dangerously blinding. Ethan remained silent as he continued opening photograph after photograph. He wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He simply allowed the images to tell their own story. "This next group was taken during cocktail hour," he said quietly. The reception ballroom looked exactly as I remembered it. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished floors. Friends laughed around tall floral centerpieces. The jazz quartet played softly near the dance floor, while waiters carried silver trays through the crowd. Marcus stood near his college friends, smiling broadly as everyone congratulated him. Vanessa was only a few feet away, yet somehow she never seemed completely present. Ethan clicked through another sequence. One frame, then another, then another. Each photograph had been taken only seconds apart. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but when viewed together, a pattern slowly emerged. Vanessa repeatedly glanced across the ballroom. Not once, not twice, again, and every single time, the same man was standing somewhere within her line of sight. Sometimes he appeared near the grand piano, sometimes beside one of the marble columns, sometimes partially hidden among guests waiting at the buffet. He never approached her. She never walked toward him, yet neither of them appeared surprised by the other's presence, almost as though they had already agreed where to stand. I almost deleted these, Ethan admitted. I thought I was imagining it. What changed your mind? He enlarged 6 photographs side by side. Timing. I leaned closer. The camera records the exact second every image is taken. He pointed toward the timestamps. 34 seconds. 41 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nearly every minute throughout the reception, Vanessa's attention drifted toward the same location. Never toward Marcus. Always toward him. I felt my stomach tighten. The ballroom that had once lived in my memory as a place of celebration now looked strangely unfamiliar. It was astonishing how quickly a single piece of information could rewrite an entire day. I remembered Vanessa laughing while guests applauded their first dance. Now I found myself wondering where she had been looking immediately afterward. I remembered her thanking everyone for coming. Now I questioned whether she had been searching the room for someone else. Memory itself began shifting beneath my feet. Ethan. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Did Marcus ever notice? I honestly don't think so. He clicked to another photograph. Marcus stood with one arm wrapped lovingly around Vanessa. She smiled beautifully for the camera. It was exactly the kind of portrait newlyweds frame above their fireplace. Then Ethan showed me the next frame. Less than 3 seconds later, Marcus had turned briefly to greet another guest. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Not gradually. Instantly. Her eyes moved across the room, toward the same man. Her expression changed into something impossible to define. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't fearful. It was familiar. Comfortably familiar. The kind of expression people wear when they recognize someone who already occupies an important place in their lives. Without realizing it, I covered my mouth with one hand. Harold used to tell me that photographs captured truths people rarely noticed while living them. At the time, I had laughed. Now his words echoed, painfully inside my mind. Ethan opened yet another folder. This wasn't what concerned me the most. I looked at him. It wasn't. He slowly shook his head. No. He hesitated before continuing. These photographs only made me curious. My heartbeat quickened. Then what made you call me? Instead of answering immediately, he maximized one final image. It had been taken just before the wedding cake was served. Most guests were watching Marcus thanking everyone for attending. Almost every face in the room pointed toward the microphone. Except 2. Vanessa and the unidentified man. Neither of them was looking at Marcus. Neither seemed interested in the speech. They were looking directly at each other. No smiles. No gestures. Only eye contact. Long enough that the camera captured it perfectly. Ethan quietly folded his hands. I've photographed hundreds of weddings. He paused. I've learned that eyes often tell a different story than smiles. The room fell silent. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside the studio windows, afternoon traffic continued moving through downtown Charlotte. Life carried on. People hurried to work. Coffee shops filled with conversations. Somewhere, another couple was probably celebrating their engagement. Meanwhile, I sat staring at a photograph that refused to let me believe my own memories anymore. Then Ethan reached for his keyboard once again. There is one more sequence, he said softly. And after you see it, I don't think either of us will ever look at this wedding the same way again. The final sequence began with a photograph so ordinary that I almost wondered if Ethan had opened the wrong folder. Marcus stood beside the wedding cake, one hand resting gently on Vanessa's back while guests gathered around them with phones raised, ready to capture the traditional cake cutting. Everyone looked exactly where they should have been looking. Everyone except one person. Vanessa. Ethan pressed the right arrow key. The next frame appeared. Marcus had turned slightly to thank one of his coworkers. Vanessa had shifted only a fraction of an inch. But her eyes had moved again, toward the same man. There are 12 photographs in this sequence, Ethan said quietly, taken over less than 20 seconds. He advanced through them slowly, allowing me to absorb each frame instead of rushing toward a conclusion. 1, 2, 3. In every image, Marcus remained unaware. He laughed. He greeted relatives. He thanked friends for traveling across the country to celebrate with them. He looked exactly like a man beginning the happiest chapter of his life. Meanwhile, Vanessa's attention seemed divided between the celebration and someone who had never been introduced. Then Ethan stopped. This is the frame. He enlarged the image until only a small section filled the monitor. The unidentified man was no longer standing across the ballroom. He had moved closer, close enough to blend naturally into the crowd. Most guests would never have noticed him. I probably hadn't. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He wasn't waving. He wasn't calling her name. He simply stood there, watching. Vanessa looked directly back. The expression between them wasn't excitement. It wasn't affection. It was certainty. The quiet certainty shared by two people who already understood something no one else did. I found myself searching the man's face. He appeared to be in his early 40s. Well-dressed, confident, completely comfortable inside a room where he supposedly knew no one. That alone unsettled me. Wedding receptions are emotional places. Strangers rarely move through them unnoticed unless they belong there. Yet Marcus had never mentioned him. Neither had Vanessa. I would have remembered introducing myself to every important guest. I always did. Can you zoom out? I asked. Ethan nodded. The full photograph returned. Suddenly another detail caught my attention. The man wasn't wearing a guest wristband. Our venue required every invited guest to receive one at check-in because several events were being held in the hotel that weekend. Every member of our family wore one. Every friend. Every vendor. Everyone. Except him. You noticed that too? Ethan gave a slow nod. It was actually the first thing that caught my eye. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that appears when two people realize they are standing at the edge of something much larger than either expected. I contacted the venue yesterday morning. Ethan finally admitted. I looked at him. You did. I simply asked whether they still had the guest registration records. My heartbeat quickened. They did. And he took a careful breath. There was no record of him checking in. A chill ran through me despite the warmth of the room. No registration. No invitation. No vendor credentials. No family identification. Nothing. The man had somehow attended my son's wedding without officially existing. I leaned back slowly. Perhaps there was still an explanation. Perhaps he had arrived with another guest. Perhaps someone had forgotten to register him. Perhaps the word had become my last refuge. Ethan seemed to understand exactly what I was thinking. I'm not telling you what this means. I'm only showing you what I found. That was what made him trustworthy. He wasn't building accusations. He was presenting facts. And facts have a quiet power. Unlike rumors, they don't need raised voices. They simply wait. I stared once more at the enlarged photograph. Something about Vanessa's face bothered me in a way I couldn't fully explain. Then I realized what it was. She wasn't surprised to see him. Not even slightly. People accidentally recognizing an unexpected guest react differently. There is usually a flash of confusion, recognition, curiosity. Her expression contained none of those things. It looked rehearsed, comfortable, expected, as though she had known exactly where he would be standing before she ever entered the ballroom. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. The morning of the wedding. Vanessa had disappeared for nearly 15 minutes before the ceremony. When one of her bridesmaids asked where she had gone, Vanessa simply smiled and said she needed a little fresh air to calm her nerves. Everyone accepted the explanation. So had I. Now that memory no longer felt quite so simple. Ethan closed the folder without saying another word. The monitor faded back to the desktop screen. I almost convinced myself not to call you, he admitted. Softly. I kept asking whether I was imagining patterns that weren't really there. I looked at him calmly. No. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. You weren't imagining them. For the first time that afternoon, I stopped trying to explain away what I had seen. Instead, another question quietly formed inside my mind. If these photographs revealed only what happened inside the ballroom, what had happened before anyone picked up a camera? I left Ethan's studio carrying nothing. No photographs, no flash drive, no printed album. He insisted that until we understood what we were looking at, the images should remain with him. Normally, I would have disagreed. Those photographs belonged to my family. They captured one of the most important days of Marcus's life. But as I walked back to my car, I realized they no longer felt like memories. They felt like evidence. The afternoon sun hung low over Charlotte, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. My hands rested quietly in my lap, while my thoughts replayed every image Ethan had shown me. Again and again. The same eyes, the same stranger, the same silent connection. For a brief moment, I considered calling Marcus. I even picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over his name. Then I slowly placed the phone back into my purse. No, not yet. Harold had always given me the same piece of advice whenever something serious happened. Never make your first decision while your emotions are making all the noise. I had repeated those words to my students for decades. Now I needed to follow them myself. Driving home, I deliberately took the longer route through the older part of town. The familiar neighborhoods somehow helped steady my breathing. Children rode bicycles along quiet sidewalks. Neighbors waved while trimming hedges. A young couple unloaded groceries from the back of their SUV, laughing over something too small for anyone else to notice. Ordinary life continued. I wondered how many families carried invisible stories behind their front doors. By the time I reached home, my heartbeat had finally slowed. Inside the house, everything remained exactly as I had left it that morning. Harold's favorite reading chair still faced the living room window. His chessboard remained on the bookshelf where I couldn't bring myself to move it. The house had become quieter after he passed away, but it had never stopped feeling safe. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner, though I barely touched it. Instead, I opened the leather-bound journal I had kept since Harold's funeral. Whenever life became too complicated to understand, I wrote instead of speaking. I turned to a blank page. At the top, I wrote only one sentence. What am I missing? I stared at those words for several minutes. Then, almost without thinking, I began writing down everything I could remember about the wedding day. Not opinions, not assumptions, only facts. Vanessa disappeared for 15 minutes before the ceremony. She returned looking perfectly calm. She checked her phone several times during the reception. She insisted on changing the seating arrangement the night before. She requested a different photographer's position just before the ceremony began. That last memory made my pen stop. I frowned. Why had she cared where Ethan stood? At the time, she had smiled politely and said she wanted better lighting for the ceremony entrance. Everyone accepted the explanation, including Ethan, including me. Now the request seemed strangely specific. I continued writing. After nearly an hour, the page was filled with little observations I had dismissed at the time because each one seemed harmless by itself. But together they formed something different. Not proof, not yet, but certainly a pattern. My phone vibrated across the kitchen table. Marcus. I answered immediately. Hi, Mom. His cheerful voice made my heart ache. Just checking on you. How's married life treating you? He laughed. So far, pretty wonderful. I closed my eyes. Hearing the happiness in his voice made everything even harder. Vanessa greeted someone in the background before asking Marcus a question I couldn't quite hear. He answered her naturally, comfortably. Nothing about his voice suggested suspicion. Nothing suggested he knew another story might exist beneath the one he was living. We're thinking about coming over this weekend, he said. Vanessa wants to bring you some leftovers from the reception. I swallowed carefully. That sounds lovely. We missed you after everyone left. I was just tired. It wasn't entirely a lie. Grief had taught me that exhaustion often came in forms sleep could never fix. After we ended the call, I remained seated at the kitchen table. One question refused to leave my mind. If Marcus truly knew nothing, then whoever had hidden the truth hadn't only deceived him. They had deceived every person who had stood inside that church. Every prayer, every promise, every photograph. Just before bedtime, my phone vibrated once more. This time it wasn't Marcus. It was Ethan. His message contained only one sentence. I remembered something else I saw before the ceremony, and I don't think it was an accident. The message stayed on my phone screen for nearly a full minute before I touched it again. I remembered something else I saw before the ceremony, and I don't think it was an accident. No explanation. No details. Only that single sentence. I called Ethan immediately. He answered before the second ring. "I'm sorry to bother you again," he said. "I almost waited until tomorrow, but I knew I wouldn't sleep if I did." "What did you remember?" "It wasn't in the photographs." My heart sank slightly. It happened before I started taking them. I listened without interrupting. When I arrived at the church that morning, I was unloading my equipment from the van. Most guests hadn't arrived yet. The bridal party was inside getting ready. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I saw Vanessa outside. Alone. I thought she was. Another pause. Until someone walked toward her. I stood motionless in my kitchen. A man. Yes. The same one. I believe so. His answer came slowly. I can't say with absolute certainty because he was wearing sunglasses then, but after looking through the photographs all afternoon, I'm almost certain it was him. I closed my eyes. What happened? They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They barely spoke. So what did they do? They stood facing each other. For maybe 30 seconds. Neither looked surprised. They looked prepared. Prepared. The words settled heavily inside me. What were they saying? I couldn't hear. There was too much distance. But I remember one thing clearly. What? He handed her something. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. What kind of something? I honestly couldn't tell. It was small. It fit inside one hand. And she slipped it into the side pocket of her bouquet before anyone else came outside. I didn't answer. My mind immediately returned to the bouquet. A beautiful arrangement of white roses and orchids. Vanessa had never let anyone hold it. Not even during photographs. At the time, I assumed she simply didn't want to damage the flowers. Now another possibility quietly appeared. Ethan, why didn't you tell me this yesterday? I wasn't sure it mattered. I only remembered because I kept replaying the entire day in my head after you left. He sounded frustrated with himself. I should have written it down. No, you've already done more than anyone else would have. Silence settled between us. Then I asked the question neither of us had wanted to ask. Could Marcus have seen any of this? I don't think so. He arrived almost 10 minutes later. After ending the call, I walked upstairs to the guest bedroom where several unopened wedding gifts still waited to be delivered to Marcus and Vanessa. Everything about the room reminded me of hope. Boxes wrapped in silver paper. Gift bags with handwritten cards. A crystal serving bowl. A quilt stitched by Marcus's aunt. Each gift represented someone's belief in a happy future. I gently sat beside the stack of presents. Then another memory surfaced. Small. Ordinary. Easy to overlook. The florist. On the wedding morning, she had commented that Vanessa insisted on keeping her bouquet nearby every moment, even while having her makeup finished. Most brides handed their flowers to a bridesmaid until photographs began. Vanessa hadn't. She had smiled politely and said, "I'd rather keep it with me." No one questioned it. Why would they? It was her wedding. Looking back now, that simple decision no longer felt random. I returned downstairs and opened my journal again. Under yesterday's notes, I added 3 more lines. Unknown man meets Vanessa before ceremony. Small object exchanged. Bouquet never leaves her possession. I stared at the page. Still no accusations. Still no conclusions. Only facts. Harold used to solve crossword puzzles by filling in only the answers he knew for certain. The guesses come later, he would say. The facts come first. That became my rule. No assumptions. No confrontation. Not until every piece fit naturally into place. Before going to bed, I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept old family photographs. I found one from Marcus's high school graduation. He stood between Harold and me, smiling with the fearless confidence only young people possess. Back then, I believed my greatest responsibility was raising him. Now I understood something different. Sometimes a mother's hardest responsibility begins long after her child becomes an adult. It begins when protecting them means risking the very happiness they think they've found. As I carefully returned the photograph to the drawer, my phone lit up one final time. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Marcus. It was a message from someone whose name I hadn't seen in almost 5 years. Lydia Washington, one of Vanessa's former bridesmaids. The message contained only 8 words. I think it's finally time someone told you everything. The next morning, I arrived at a quiet cafe, 20 minutes early. Old habit. Harold used to say that arriving early gave you time to observe before anyone started performing. I chose a small table near the window where the morning light softened everything it touched. Outside, people hurried to work with paper coffee cups in their hands, completely unaware that my world had begun splitting into two versions. The one I had lived, and the one I was slowly discovering. At exactly 9 o'clock, the cafe door opened. A woman paused just inside. She looked around until our eyes met. Lydia Washington. The last time I had seen her, she had been standing beside Vanessa in a pale lavender bridesmaid dress, smiling for family photographs. Today, she looked older than 5 years should allow. Not physically, emotionally. There was a heaviness in the way she carried herself, as though she had been holding something far too long. Mrs. Brooks. I stood and offered a gentle smile. Lydia. She sat across from me, wrapping both hands around the cup of coffee she had brought from the counter. For several moments, neither of us spoke. I almost didn't come, she admitted. I know. I've been trying to forget everything. The word everything immediately caught my attention. Not something. Everything. I want you to know, she continued softly. I'm not here because I dislike Vanessa. I cared about her once. I still hope she finds peace. Her voice trembled slightly. But Marcus doesn't deserve to build his life on something that wasn't honest from the beginning. I remained completely still. Experience had taught me that interrupting someone carrying guilt often made them retreat behind silence. So I simply listened. Lydia took a slow breath. About 2 months before the wedding, Vanessa started acting differently. In what way? Secretive. Always checking her phone. Leaving conversations halfway through. Canceling plans without explanations. None of those details shocked me anymore. I had already written similar observations inside my journal. Then Lydia said something I hadn't expected. I asked her once if she still wanted to get married. My heartbeat slowed. What did she say? She smiled. Lydia looked down at her untouched coffee. Then she told me love isn't always the reason people get married. Those words settled over the table like cold rain. I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I allowed the silence to exist. Sometimes silence reveals more than questions. What did she mean? I finally asked. I asked the same thing. And she laughed, then changed the subject. Lydia reached into her handbag. For one brief second, my heart tightened. She removed a small envelope. Nothing more. I almost threw this away. She carefully slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a folded seating chart from the rehearsal dinner. Several names had been crossed out in blue ink. One replacement had been written neatly beside them. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Vanessa's. What am I looking at? Lydia pointed toward one particular table assignment. There, a single seat had been moved. Not closer to Marcus. Not closer to family. Closer to one of the side exits leading toward the church garden. The rehearsal coordinator thought it was strange, Lydia explained. But Vanessa insisted. She said she wanted easier access for photographs. Photographs. Again, everything seemed to circle back to photographs. To camera positions. To sight lines. To where people stood. To who could see whom. I carefully folded the paper. Lydia, is there something you're afraid to tell me? She looked out the cafe window before answering. Yes. Her honesty surprised me. I never actually saw Vanessa do anything inappropriate. I never saw her break a promise. I never saw her with another man. She stopped. But I saw enough to know she was hiding part of her life. That distinction mattered. She wasn't offering accusations. Only observations. Just like Ethan. Just like the photographs. Just like my own journal. Facts. Nothing more. Nothing less. As we stood to leave, Lydia hesitated beside the cafe door. There is one more thing. I waited. The morning of the wedding. She swallowed carefully. I saw someone leave a black sedan behind the church. A man got out. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo yet. He changed later. I felt my pulse quicken. Could you recognize him again? She nodded slowly. I think so. Then she added the sentence I would replay in my mind for days afterward. When I saw your wedding photographs online that evening, I realized I'd seen the same man twice. She quietly walked away before I could ask another question. I remained standing on the sidewalk, holding the folded seating chart in one hand. For the first time since Ethan's phone call, the scattered pieces no longer felt random. Someone had carefully planned movements, positions, timing, not just during the wedding, before it ever began. And somewhere within that plan, one final piece was still missing. By the time I arrived home that afternoon, I had stopped asking whether something was wrong. The question had changed. Now I wanted to know how long it had been happening. I spread everything across my dining room table. My journal, the rehearsal seating chart, the notes from Ethan, a legal pad filled with dates and observations. For nearly 2 hours, I moved papers from one side of the table to the other, not searching for guilt, but for order. Truth usually has a pattern. Lies usually depend on chaos. I refused to let myself become emotional before I became organized. Just as I finished arranging the papers, my doorbell rang. Marcus. And Vanessa. Exactly as he had promised. Marcus carried 2 containers of leftover wedding cake. Vanessa held a bouquet of fresh sunflowers. She smiled warmly the moment I opened the door. Hi, Gloria. Her voice sounded exactly the same as it always had. Comfortable. Relaxed. Natural. If I hadn't seen those photographs, I would have believed nothing in the world had changed. Marcus hugged me tightly. We missed you. I missed you too. That part was true. I missed the version of life I thought we were living. We sat together in the living room. Marcus talked excitedly about their honeymoon plans. Vanessa described a small cabin they wanted to rent in the mountains later that fall. I listened, occasionally smiling, occasionally asking simple questions. Not because I wanted information, because I wanted to watch. People reveal far more while believing everything is normal. At one point, Marcus stepped into the kitchen to refill our glasses. For perhaps 20 seconds, Vanessa and I were alone. She looked around the room. Her eyes rested briefly on the dining table. The papers were no longer there. I had locked everything inside Harold's old desk before they arrived. Still, she seemed to notice something. You've been organizing? She asked casually. A little. She nodded. I always admire how neat you keep everything. It was an ordinary conversation, yet something about the timing unsettled me. Why had she looked toward the dining room first? Before family photographs. Before the flowers. Before anything else. Marcus returned carrying iced tea. The conversation resumed as though nothing had happened. About an hour later, they prepared to leave. Marcus hugged me once again. We'll come by next week. I'd like that. Vanessa embraced me gently. For a brief second, I caught the faint scent of the same perfume she had worn on her wedding day. Suddenly, every photograph Ethan had shown me flashed through my mind. The smiles. The glances. The unknown man. I forced myself to remain calm. After they drove away, I stood at the front window watching their car disappear around the corner. Only then did I release the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That evening, I decided to do something I had avoided since Harold passed away. I opened his old filing cabinet in the study. Most drawers contained ordinary household records. Insurance papers, tax documents, warranty manuals. The bottom drawer held something different. Old address books, church directories, holiday cards from decades earlier. Harold never threw away names. He believed every person entered your life for a reason. As I slowly turned the pages of one worn address book, a folded business card slipped onto the floor. It landed face up. Carter Event Security, a local company we had hired years ago for a charity fundraiser at church. The name triggered an unexpected memory. Our wedding venue had also employed private security during large events. Not because trouble was expected, simply because several weddings had been scheduled that weekend. A thought quietly formed. If the unidentified man had entered without registering, someone might still remember seeing him. The next morning, I called the venue. The event manager recognized my name immediately. She expressed sympathy for the confusion surrounding my questions and agreed to meet me. I can't promise we'll find anything, she said kindly. But I remember that weekend very well. 2 hours later, I found myself standing once again outside the hotel where Marcus and Vanessa had celebrated the beginning of their marriage. The ballroom had already been transformed for another family's reception. Fresh flowers, different colors, different music, another beginning. The manager welcomed me into her office. She opened several archived files before pausing. There was one incident. That weekend. I leaned forward. What kind of incident? A security officer reported briefly losing sight of an unidentified guest near the church garden before your ceremony. My pulse quickened. Did they stop him? She slowly shook her head. No. By the time they reached the area, he had already disappeared inside with the arriving guests. She slid a single incident report across the desk. At the bottom of the page, one handwritten sentence caught my eye. Individual appeared to know exactly where he was going. I looked up. For the first time since Ethan's phone call, I understood something with complete certainty. The stranger hadn't wandered into the wedding by chance. He had arrived with a purpose. The incident report rested quietly in my hands as I drove home. It contained no dramatic language, no accusations, no names, just a simple observation written by a security officer doing his job. Individual appeared to know exactly where he was going. Sometimes the smallest sentence carries the greatest weight. That evening, I spread every document across Harold's old desk one final time. The photographs, Lydia's notes, the rehearsal seating chart, the security report, my journal. One by one, I arranged them according to time instead of importance. Before the ceremony, during the ceremony, cocktail hour, the reception, patterns that had once seemed disconnected now formed a single line. The unknown man had appeared before the wedding. He had remained throughout the celebration. He had positioned himself where Vanessa could see him repeatedly. He had entered without registering. And according to Lydia, someone matching his description had arrived before guests were allowed inside. None of those facts alone proved betrayal. Together, however, they proved something equally undeniable. The wedding had contained a secret. I closed my journal and looked toward Harold's portrait above the fireplace. For years, whenever I faced difficult decisions, I imagined the advice he would have given me. Not because I believed he had every answer, but because he always reminded me to choose dignity over impulse. I know what I have to do, I whispered. Not expose, not accuse, not seek revenge. Simply tell Marcus what I knew. Nothing more, nothing less. The following afternoon, I called him. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Of course, Mom. His answer came without hesitation. Just us. There was a brief pause. Sure. I'll come after work. When we ended the call, I felt neither relief nor fear. Only responsibility. That night, sleep came slowly. Memories drifted through my mind like old home movies. Marcus learning to ride his bicycle. Harold cheering from the sidewalk. Family vacations. Birthday cakes. Christmas mornings. Every parent imagines they will one day protect their child from scraped knees, broken hearts, and disappointment. No one tells you that sometimes the hardest truths arrive after your child has become fully grown. The next day passed quietly. I cooked Marcus's favorite meal, just as I had done since he was a little boy. Baked chicken, collard greens, sweet potatoes, cornbread. Simple food, comforting food. The dining room looked exactly as it always had. Only one thing was different. Beside my chair rested a sealed envelope. Inside were copies of everything. Not opinions, not conclusions, only facts, photographs, notes, the incident report, the seating chart. If Marcus chose to look at them, that decision would belong to him. If he chose not to, that would also be his choice. Just before 6 o'clock, his truck pulled into the driveway. He stepped inside carrying the same easy smile he had worn since childhood. The sight of him nearly broke my heart. He hugged me tightly. Something smells amazing. I smiled. It always did when you came home. We shared dinner. We talked about ordinary things. Work, neighbors, the weather. For almost an hour, I allowed him to enjoy one more peaceful evening before the weight I carried became his as well. Finally, after clearing the dishes, I placed the envelope gently on the table between us. His smile faded slightly. Mom, what is this? I folded my hands together. There are some things I believe you deserve to see. He looked from the envelope back to me. Is something wrong? I answered with complete honesty. I don't know. That's why I'm giving this to you instead of telling you what to believe. He slowly opened the envelope. The first photograph appeared. Then another. Then another. I didn't explain. I didn't point. I didn't interrupt. The room remained almost completely silent except for the quiet sound of photographs sliding across the wooden table. After several minutes, Marcus stopped turning pages. He stared at one image much longer than the others. Finally, he spoke. Not loudly. Not angrily. Almost to himself. I never noticed where she was looking. Neither had I. Not until someone who spent his life preserving memories had looked more carefully than the rest of us. Marcus closed the envelope and lowered his eyes. For several long moments, neither of us said another word. Outside, the evening sun disappeared beyond the trees, leaving the room wrapped in gentle shadows. I reached across the table and quietly placed my hand over his. No matter what he would discover next, he would not have to face it alone.